Here we go. All right. So my name is Carol Jean Davis. I'm from the League of Women Voters, Downers Grove, Lisle, Woodridge. And today we're going to be talking about the League's position on abolishing the Electoral College. But before we get started, there's a few housekeeping rules. We are a biggish group, or we expect to be a biggish group. So we're muting everybody during the presentation. And after the presentation, we're going to try to have people raise your hand or enter your question in the chat. And we expect comments and the chat to be civil and not disruptive. We welcome the tough questions and a lively discussion, but we do expect that the questions in the discussion are civil and not disruptive. Please be patient, as this is one of our first programs for the Downers Grove Lisle Woodridge League on Zoom that's open to the general public. And many of us are getting comfortable with manipulating all the technology. So we're going to, our little boilerplate disclaimer about the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization dedicated to making democracy work through voter education, issue advocacy, and citizen participation. We never support any political party or candidate, but we do take positions on certain issues. The Electoral College is one example, and hence this presentation today. The League of Women Voters has had a position to abolish the Electoral College in favor of a direct vote system since 1970. While the political landscape has changed many times over these 53 years, the need to eliminate this indirect and confusing process has only become more urgent. In 2023, the League of Women Voters of the United States announced that it was undertaking a multi-year national campaign to abolish the Electoral College by an amendment to the United States Constitution. Rosemary Heileman, member of the League of Women Voters, Deerfield, Lincolnshire, and a founding member of the Interleague Electoral College Committee, will highlight a few of the most important reasons for supporting a fundamental change in the way we elect our president and vice president. Rosemary has been a member of the League of Women Voters for 45 years. She helped form a committee in 2017 to promote attention to this long-held League position. Committee members have since given hundreds of presentations in multiple communities and states and continue to meet monthly. Our goal is to keep this topic in the forefront of public discussion until it becomes widely accepted that an amendment is needed. So that we can get through the entire slide deck in the allotted time, all questions will be held until the end, and participants are asked to stay muted until the presentation of the slide deck is complete. It takes about 40 minutes to get through all of them. So let's dig in. Take it away, Rosemary.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be here, and I'm looking forward to our discussion afterwards. And this is one of the PowerPoints that's on the League website, because there's a whole toolkit, as well as the brochures, which I think Carol is making available to the members either in PDF or in printed form. So this is a scripted presentation because the idea is that we want League members to be presenting this all over the country, actually, over the next few years. We know this is not going to be a quick process, but right now we're in the phase of educating the public. And so that's what the idea is of this presentation. So let me see. Let me get this over here. So this is what we're going to cover today. We'll start. So I'm going to be reading most of it. We'll start with the basics. What is the Electoral College, and what is the League of Women Voters' position on this method of electing our president? Then we'll show the problems caused by the Electoral College, problems that a direct popular vote would easily solve. Then we'll review the top arguments given in favor of the electoral system and see why each of those reasons are actually based on myths. Finally, we'll explain what needs to be done to abolish the Electoral College, an amendment to the Constitution, and what you can do to help make that happen. And then we'll have time for questions afterwards. So what is the Electoral College? Well, it's a group of currently 538 people who elect the president and vice president of the United States every 4 years. According to the US Constitution, each state legislature, and I'm going to expand on that myself in a minute, uh, gets to decide how their electors will be chosen. In the beginning of our country, state legislatures just pick the electors themselves. Over time, states started choosing electors by popular vote within their state. Each political party has its own slate of electors. When you vote in November, you are not voting directly for a presidential candidate. You are voting for a group of state electors from the candidate's political party who have pledged to give their electoral votes to that candidate. So I like to emphasize this and talk about this as one of the less known features of the Electoral College. So according to the US Constitution, and I'm quoting directly from Article 2, Section 1, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in Congress. That has never changed. That is still the law of the land, that the state legislatures decide how to choose their electors. So I have some data here from the 1804 election, which was when they were just starting to let the public vote because parties had arisen, which people like John Adams really hated the idea of parties, but they arose right away. So just to give you an idea, in the 1804 election, these states were still picking the electors by their own state legislatures: Connecticut, Delaware, Georgia, New York, South Carolina, Vermont. Then these states were allowing their voters to pick the electors: New Hampshire, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Virginia. These states had the state divided into electoral districts with one elector chosen per district by the voters of that district. That was North Carolina, Maryland, Tennessee. This state was divided into two electoral districts, and half the electors were chosen from each. That was Kentucky's idea. And in Massachusetts, used a system which is still being used by New Hampshire and Nebraska, which is two electors chosen by voters statewide and one elector chosen per congressional district in a statewide vote. So South Carolina did not allow the people to vote for the electors for the president of the United States until after the Civil War. So legislatures still have this option. And after the last election, there were several legislatures where members brought bills to their state legislatures asking them to enable legislation to allow their own legislature to overturn election results, if they thought it was crooked or if they thought there was a mistake or whatever it might be. So to me, that's one of the biggest fears right now about this system, is that the state legislatures could give themselves oversight on the popular vote of their state. So back to the script. So each state gets a specific number of electors based on their congressional delegation, one elector for each US senator and each US representative. For example, Texas had 38 electoral votes in 2020, while Rhode Island had 4. The District of Columbia, although not a state, gets 3 electors. Importantly, the winner of the Electoral College is not whoever gets the most electoral votes. The winner must have a majority of the votes, over 50% of the votes to win. Currently, that's 270 electoral votes to win. If no candidate gets 270 votes, the US House of Representatives chooses the president, with each state having just one vote, and the Senate chooses the vice president. And this is the other less known feature that I like to emphasize, because if there's a third party candidate that disrupts the votes, it's entirely possible that an election could go to the House of Representatives if none of the candidates has 270 or more. And in that case, the entire state of California, for example, which has 50 representatives, gets one vote. The entire state of New York, all of their representatives, one vote. That guy in Wyoming, one vote. So that's called a contingent election. And we've had there was one that Andrew Jackson lost that made him very angry. And there was another one in 1876. So it is still in the Constitution that way. It could still happen. And that's my second less known feature about the Electoral College. So let's go on. So the League of Women Voters of the United States has adopted this position in 1970 that the direct popular method for electing the president and vice president is essential to representative government. The League believes, therefore, that the Electoral College should be abolished. The rest of this presentation will explain the many problems with the Electoral College that the League had identified. You may not have heard about some of these problems, but there are also some that you may know all about. So let's jump into the first part, which is what's wrong with the Electoral College and how would a direct popular vote for president solve each and every one of these problems? To start, we're going back to the very beginning. The Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, took place during a hot, long summer in 1787. They were assembled to improve the system they had, which was the Articles of Confederation. But they soon realized they needed a whole new system. There we go. Each of the original 13 states could send delegates to represent them at the Constitutional Convention. 55 delegates attended, representing 12 of the 13 original states. Rhode Island refused to participate because they thought they were so small they would be taken advantage of, so they wanted to protest, I guess. The delegates included many famous men, including George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, John Adams, and Alexander Hamilton. These men faced the task of creating a new national system of government, and there were many fierce debates and arguments. How to elect a president was one of the first arguments to arise, and it was the last one to be resolved through a compromise idea that ultimately came to be called the Electoral College. Now, as we criticize some aspects of the Electoral College, one of the themes that one of our history professor speakers reminded us was we have to give the founders some slack and remember that they were starting something brand new, something very daring, had never been done in the world before, and they were trying to protect their own interests and maintain their integrity as a separate country. So whatever they came up with was the best that they could do at the time. So we want to remember that. So unfortunately, the Electoral College was one of the big aspects in the creation was slavery. The Electoral College at the end, what they finally came up with after rejecting a lot of other ideas was the system we had that included the number of representatives and the number of senators, because the 3/5 compromise had already been used to determine the representatives. So the Electoral College was a compromise designed to give Southern states more voting power in presidential elections based on counting each enslaved person as 3/5 of a free person. This 3/5 compromise had already been used to increase the number of representatives given to Southern states in the U.S. House of Representatives. Because the Electoral College is based in part on the number of members that each state has in Congress, it carried this infamous math into the presidential election. And then the other part, the two senators, adding those two numbers to each state, was a way to give the small states a little extra edge in the Electoral College. The rift between the North and South was not because there were more people living in the northern states than in the southern states. In fact, as you can see on this chart, the northern and southern states had essentially the same total population in the late 1700s, about 1.8 million people each. However, The southern states had a much smaller voting population than the northern states because over a third of the southern states' population was enslaved. As a result, the southern states adamantly refused a direct popular vote for president. Before the convention, everyone expected that there would be battles between smaller versus larger population states. But as Madison wrote about halfway through the convention, it now seems to be pretty well understood that the real difference of interests lies not between the large and small states, but between the northern and southern states. The institution of slavery and its consequences formed the line of discrimination. And that's not to say that there wasn't slavery in the North. There was slavery allowed, but it had not developed because there hadn't been discovered a use for it. If the racism of the Electoral College had ended when slavery ended, we might not be having this conversation. But the Electoral College continued to silence Black votes after the Civil War as well. So right after the Civil War, there was a brief period called Reconstruction, when federal troops were stationed in the South to enforce the newly won civil rights of formerly enslaved Americans. During Reconstruction, Black men voted, of course, no women yet, and the first Black representatives served in Congress. But then came the election of 1876. All right, so what happened in 1876 was there was a lot of disruption. There were fights at the polls in the states. People came armed. And 4 states, Florida, North Carolina, Louisiana, and Oregon, actually submitted 2 slates of electors to the House of Representatives. So there was a lot of confusion. It appeared that Tilden actually won the popular vote, but he did not have, whatever the number was at the time, the right number of electors. So it went into the House of Representatives. There were allegations of voter fraud. Both sides claimed victory, and they didn't count those ballots. They didn't know how to count those ballots. So the 2 parties came up with a compromise. And this was really a backdoor deal. The compromise gave the election to Hayes, Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican. Now remember, in those days, the Republicans were the radical Republicans of they were Lincoln's party, in exchange for removing federal troops from the states that had rebelled. This compromise allowed Hayes to be president in exchange for the removal of federal troops from the South. The states of the former Confederacy were once again allowed to rule themselves, and they quickly started passing a series of laws commonly known as Jim Crow laws. During the Jim Crow era, the voting rights of Black people were systematically destroyed by state laws and local ordinances like poll taxes and literacy tests. The Jim Crow era lasted for almost 100 years until the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So the Electoral College was created because of slavery, and the failure of the Electoral College in 1876 allowed racism to flourish. And this was the first time that they set up what we know now as the Electoral Count Act of 1876, which put in some administrative rules for, what to do if you get 2 slates of electors from states and things like that. And so after this last election, some of you may be aware, there was a bipartisan rewriting of the Electoral Count Act, but it didn't change the Electoral College. It just set times of, what can the vice president do? Whose slate of electors counts? Who's the official that gets to sign off? It's administrative. But it was a bipartisan effort to add some order to the votes coming in. Unfortunately, the racist impact of the Electoral College didn't end with the Voting Rights Act. The Electoral College continues to suppress the voice of Black Americans. That's because states with a higher percentage of Black residents tend to have less power in the Electoral College, while states with whiter populations tend to have more power. For this analysis, Electoral College power, quote, is defined as the number of people it takes within a state for each electoral vote. It takes fewer people to make up, if it takes fewer people to make up one electoral vote, the electoral power is stronger. For example, in the chart on the left, in states that are more than 85% white, it's about 400,000 people per each electoral vote. But in states that are more than 15% Black, higher than the national average, it's almost 650,000 people per electoral vote. If you do the math, it means that it takes 1.6 votes in states with high Black populations to equal 1 vote in states with higher white populations. This is simple analysis based on a 2020 census data. However, a more sophisticated statistical analysis done by William Black from the University of Maryland in 2019 came to the same conclusion. His analysis of every election from 2000 on indicates the Electoral College has consistently awarded more votes per capita to states with whiter populations. Again, the Electoral College may not be trying to mute Black votes, but it is having that impact simply because of how our Black and white populations are distributed across the states. Perhaps this will naturally reduce over time, but a direct popular vote where everyone gets one vote and they count them all up and whoever wins, wins, would immediately eliminate this racist impact by making every voter count as one vote, regardless of race or any other demographic. And a lot of people are more concerned about this aspect of the Electoral College. They are not aware of the racism that's been part of it from the beginning, yet they are aware of the fact that it often turns losers into winners. 5 times in our history, the Electoral College has awarded the presidency to the candidates who lost the popular vote. This happened 3 times in the 1800s and twice in this century, in 2016 and 2000. A direct popular vote for president would ensure that the candidate who gets the most votes from the people would actually be the president. Another problem is that the Electoral College violates the principle of one person, one vote. And this kind of explains the slide a couple of points ago about the 1.6 to 1 ratio that we talked about for the Black and white voters. Because of, and it has to do with adding those 2 senators to give a little extra representation to the less populated states. Let's see, okay, that's because the number of electoral votes given to a state isn't exactly proportional to its population. No matter how many people live in a state, it gets an additional 2 electoral votes based on the 2 senators. So voters from smaller states have their votes weighted more heavily in the Electoral College than votes from larger states. For example, you can see in the table on the left that 1 vote in Wyoming counts almost as much as 4 votes in Florida. Wyoming has 3 electoral votes, or 1 electoral vote for every 192,000 people. Florida is a bigger state, and it has 29 electoral votes. That's 1 electoral vote for every 743,000 people in Florida. So if you do the math, in the Electoral College, it takes nearly 4 popular votes in Florida to equal 1 popular vote in Wyoming. This plays out in other small and large state matchups like Wyoming, Vermont, or Alaska, whose electoral votes count as much as 3 or 4 votes in states like Florida, Texas, and California. A fundamental principle of the United States is that 1 person has 1 vote. That is the standard for every other election in this country. And it should be 1 person, 1 vote in our presidential elections. And that's exactly how it would be in a direct popular vote. So a simpler way, I think, to visualize what this is all about, because it's a little, this math sometimes is daunting. If Wyoming has 1 electoral vote because Wyoming has 1 representative, and they have about 600,000 people. California has 54 representatives, and they have 10% of the United States population. So, millions, I don't know, 30 million people or something like that. So if you have 54 electoral votes and you add two more, it's not going to divide up the numbers that much from what you had already. But you had two more electors to Wyoming's one for those 600,000 people. That has a big impact on how many people are represented by one elector. So that's the whole idea there. But actually, all of that is not even that impactful, because regardless of how votes are weighted in the Electoral College, we all know by now, if you watch TV in the last 10 years, that only a few states really matter in the presidential election. These are the so-called swing states, where the outcome of the vote is considered to be up for grabs. In other words, they're not sure if it's going to go one way or the other because it's so close. The rest of the states are considered safe states, where the feeling is that the election result is obvious. The map here shows the swing states from the 2020 election. It changes from year to year. The top swing states are in dark purple: Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida. Then there were another 7 swing states shown in lighter purple. That it wasn't quite as close. Together, these swing states got almost all the TV ads and campaign events. They come to the other states for money, but they don't campaign. In fact, 100% of the TV ads and 98% of campaign events, not fundraisers, for 2020 general election presidential campaigns were in these states. They get all of the candidates' attention, and even worse, that means that they have much greater influence over candidates' policy positions. With direct election by popular vote, candidates would be forced to pay attention to the whole country, not just a handful of states. All 50 states and the District of Columbia would require consideration from presidential candidates. And this is a spot I'm going to add a little something. We talk about safe states. So Illinois is considered a blue state. California is a blue state. Let's say Idaho and Wyoming, they are considered red states. But I printed out the actual popular figures from the 2020 election, so that's our most recent. And you have to realize it's only relatively blue in Illinois and relatively red in Idaho. So for example, in Illinois, Biden got 3.5 million votes, but Trump got 2.5 million votes. So Illinois is really purple. It's just a little more bluish purple. And then you take a state like, what did we say? Well, Idaho's small, but let's take a look. So Idaho, Biden won 287, so say 300,000 votes, and Trump won 554, so 550,000 votes. So Idaho is also purple, it's just more reddish purple. And that's true for all of these states. You can name any state that you want. Tennessee, let's see, Tennessee. Biden got let's say 1.2 million, and Trump got 1.8 million votes. So the swing states are just that much closer. But really, the red and blue maps I blame it on the media, because they're trying to make it interesting and simple for the public. Those maps with the red and blue states do such a disservice to our country, because they make us think we're more divided than we are. And really, we are not that divided. Okay. That's my other little speech there. That's my third less known feature that people don't think about. And that's the last one. I won't deviate too much now. Another thing, which, if you're a member of the League of Women Voters, you want people to vote. That's the most important thing. We do not support any candidates. We do not support any parties. We do have positions on issues such as this, the Electoral College, but only in a nonpartisan way, that we support issues in the interest of the betterment of the country. We never support a political party or a candidate. But The Electoral College discourages voter participation. It not only makes some votes matter than others, it gives people a reason not to vote. It actually decreases voter turnout in so-called safe states. Data from 2016 and 2020 prove this. In the graph, you can see that the percentage of eligible voters who cast a vote for president was significantly lower in safe states compared to the swing states. So, Illinois, oh, well, here it says it here. These differences may seem small, only 5 or 6 percentage points, but that translates to 15 million registered voters in non-swing states who chose not to vote in 2016 and 22 million registered voters who chose not to vote in 2020. That's more than enough to change the outcome of a presidential election. This is a nonpartisan issue affecting both major political parties. If I'm a Republican voter in a blue state or a Democratic voter in a red state, I feel like my vote for president never counts, so why bother? On the flip side, Republican voters in red states and Democratic voters in blue states feel like their party doesn't really need their votes. So millions of people just don't vote. A direct popular vote for president will increase voter turnout by making every vote count and count equally. Okay. And along with this emphasis and attention paid to the swing states, as we saw during the 2020 election and its aftermath, the Electoral College also leaves our presidential elections more vulnerable to manipulation and even outright fraud. The Electoral College provides partisan operatives with a roadmap for overturning election results. In 2020, that created a desire to, quote, find an additional 38 electoral votes instead of over 3.5 million votes if the winner were chosen by popular vote. And the Electoral College showed where it would be easiest to gain those electoral votes by, quote, finding fewer than 43,000 ballots in just 3 states, Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin. That's all it would have taken to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. So those are 6 major problems with the Electoral College, and each of them would be fixed by using a direct popular vote to elect the president. You may be convinced, but not everybody is. After outlining all of these problems with the Electoral College, we hear from some folks who say, well, even if all this is true, here's why the Electoral College still makes sense. We'd like to walk through some of the most common reasons why some people continue to support the Electoral College system. They are not just fringe theories, by the way. They are the main points that supporters of the Electoral College use to defend this undemocratic system. And none of them stands up under scrutiny. They are actually myths that do not stand up to facts. So let's bust those myths now. I'm going to take a sip of pop here. All right. Myth number 1. Without the Electoral College, our presidents would all be chosen by a couple of big states like California and New York. We decided to run through some numbers to see what a direct popular vote would look like. Okay, so I'm going to click on the first part here. Okay, so these are the actual number of votes that Obama received, we're going to show you, in the 2012 election. And if we're using 50%, which is not, that would be debatable, but let's say 63.4 million votes would be the majority of the popular vote. Okay. If you can see on your screen, there's a list of all the states down on the bottom there, and they are listed in order of population size, voter size, voter population. So starting with California has the most voters, and New York has the next, and then Florida, then Texas, and then it goes down, smaller, and then the last one there is AK, that's Alaska. So in 2012, the votes of California, you see that first blue bar, and then you add that to the New York, that the second bar is California plus New York. So each one, it's like all of the preceding states added on to the next one. Excuse me. So California and New York together only provided 12 million votes, and 63 million were needed. All right. Then let's go one more click. All right, and now we go for the first 5 states, including Florida, Texas, and Illinois, still brings us up to just about 23 million votes, so it's not even half yet. The first thing we notice is that Texas and Florida, the populations are larger than New York, but the voters were not. Second, we could see that every state has a mixture of Republican and Democratic voters. So so we zeroed in on how many states it realistically takes to win the popular vote. So I already showed you this part. I went ahead of myself. Okay. So you can see that if you add the bar for each state going up, it actually takes 39 states, or it would have taken, if we counted the popular vote, it would have taken 39 states added one on top of another and another. And it looks like we get up to, it looks like New Mexico and Maine here. And then these little bits above the bar, that's gravy. That's more than you needed. So right up to where the bar meets the line is 39 states needed to win the popular vote. So, I say to you, so if California is 10% of the United States population, they should have 10% of the effect in the electoral, in the popular vote. But 10% is not enough to determine an election. And don't forget, in California, out of that 10, this is just the Obama votes here that you're seeing. In California, in the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton had 8 million votes, but Trump had 4 million votes. And those were wiped out by the Electoral College system. So it is simply mathematically impossible for an election by popular vote to be determined by just the largest state. The fact is that direct election by popular vote means that votes from most or all states would be needed to win the presidency, and every vote would count and count the same, no matter where the elector lived. After seeing these facts about states, believers in the Electoral College will then bring up a similar myth, that without the Electoral College, our presidents would be chosen by just a few big cities like New York, Los Angeles, and California, and Chicago. Once again, statistics tell a different story. These pie charts show the percentage of voting age adults who live in big cities. As seen on the first chart on the left, the combined voting age population of New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago is just 5% of the national voting age population. That's certainly not enough to decide an election. So we expanded to the top 10 cities, those with over 1 million residents, and that adds up to just 8% of the voting age population. Even when we went to the 50 biggest cities, they made up just 15% of the voting age population of this country. That's about the same as the size of the rural population. There just aren't enough people living in big cities to decide our president on their own. Most people, 71% in this country, live in smaller towns and suburban areas. It is simply mathematically impossible for an election by popular vote to be determined by just the largest states or the largest cities. Once again, direct election by popular vote would ensure that every person is equally represented regardless of where they live. Now, this is an important myth for the League of Women Voters because we are often accused of having a partisan bent to our points of view. And this will show you that this is a nonpartisan issue. Here's myth number 3. Abolishing the Electoral College will only benefit Democratic candidates. To bust this myth, let's look at the 2004 presidential election, the Bush-Kerry election. On the left is the actual electoral map for the 2004 election. So George W. Bush did win over John Kerry. He had 3 million more popular votes than Kerry, and he won the electoral count. He had 286 electors, and Kerry had 251. So the popular vote and the electoral vote matched. However, we made a map on the right where just one state is changed. And if you can't see it, I wouldn't blame you. It's Ohio. If John Kerry had received only 119,000 more votes in Ohio, he would have won the Electoral College and the election, even though Bush would still have had nearly 3 million more popular votes. So that would have put him over just barely, but he would have been over to 271. Bush would have been at 266, but Bush still had about 3 million more popular votes. So it was a close call for the Republicans in that election. The fact is that the Electoral College can hurt either one of our two major political parties. This is a nonpartisan issue. Myth number 4. Perhaps the biggest obstacle to eliminating the Electoral College is just plain pessimism. Many people feel that the Electoral College will never be abolished because it would take a constitutional amendment to do it. It's never going to happen is a comment we hear all too often. What we need to defeat is defeatism. And I tell people, we know when we make these presentations, there's some people that we will not be able to convince. They have their own ideas and they are not going to agree with us. And then there's a certain number of people that are listening, and maybe they'll agree with us, maybe they won't, but they have an open mind. And then we have people that we consider our allies who agree that the Electoral College is bad, but they have this pessimistic attitude that, oh, it's impossible, it could never happen, it's hopeless. And that's so heartbreaking because these are our friends, and trying to convince them that this is a battle that's worth the effort. Here's a timeline showing the dates that all constitutional amendments were ratified. We've had amendments to the Constitution. The Bill of Rights is shown with just one bar. You can see that our history includes flurries of constitutional activity punctuated by long periods of inactivity. There was a period of 60 years between the first two clumps, then another gap of 43 years. There were 18 years between the amendments of the 1930s and those of the 50s and 60s, then a gap of 21 years to the 27th Amendment in 1992, and it's been 30 years since then. What distinguishes these periods of constitutional activity? They tended to be periods of great national political activity where citizens were feeling that our democracy was in crisis, where the demand for change across our society was persistent and loud. There was the period after the Civil War, the progressive era as at the turn of the last century, and the civil rights era in the 1950s and 60s. We seem to be in the middle of another period of political activity, of demand for change. Only time will tell, but the level of engagement we are seeing now and the genuine concerns about the resiliency of our democracy are remarkable. So let's focus on our goal, abolishing the Electoral College by amending the Constitution. What will it take to get there? Our ultimate goal is a constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College and use the direct popular vote to elect our president. This is how we amend the Constitution. First, a bill to propose an amendment needs to pass both the United States House and the Senate by a 2/3 vote. The president does not need to sign. That's not easy, nor should it be. Then the proposed amendment needs to be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures. That's 38 states. Again, not easy. That's purposely not easy. But it's been done 27 times. We can do it again. And please note that it doesn't require a constitutional convention to accomplish this. The usual normal amendment process outlined here is what we need would do the job of abolishing the Electoral College. And I will mention here, there has been another approach that the League does support called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And Illinois is already a member of the compact, one of the first signers. And so we do not address the compact in this presentation, but I'll be happy to answer questions about it later. So what actions have happened? Well, in 1968 to 70, 81% of the people supported. Why? What was the interest there? Well, there was a lot of momentum at that time because in the 1968 election, a third-party candidate, George Wallace, got 46 votes in the Electoral College. Both Democrats and Republicans were worried that Wallace's popularity could have resulted in neither Richard Nixon nor Humphrey getting the required 270 votes in the Electoral College to win the election. Now, Wallace never thought he'd win, but he thought if he could disrupt the election and neither Nixon nor Humphrey would get 270, that he could negotiate some concessions from whoever he threw his votes to. It did not come to that. Nixon indeed was able to win, but people knew about this situation. A Gallup poll at the time shows a whopping 81% of Americans supported abolishing the Electoral College. And a bill to amend the Constitution passed the House of Representatives by a huge bipartisan margin, 338 to 70. The mover of this bill was Birch Bayh from Indiana, who you may know was very active in other amendments as well, and very devoted to this process. And Nixon supported the abolishment of the Electoral College, even though he didn't have a say. However, the bill died in the Senate, where it was filibustered by, at that time, Southern Democrats, who we used to call Dixiecrats. So they were Democrats, but they were, more a different type than today's Democrats, who feared that their states would lose power in presidential elections because of their traditionally low voter turnout. Similar bills have been introduced as recently as 2021, but there's been no vote on the floor in those bills. They mostly wind up in committee. We believe this issue lacks momentum because of the defeatist attitude that it's never going to happen. So that's what we need to change. We need momentum. The League of Women Voters is uniquely positioned to empower voters through education and advocacy at the local, state, and national levels. Once empowered, voters can then be activated when the time is right to bring this momentum to Congress. We engage with voters, provide them with information and education they need about elections and issues, and then armed with this education, the League can activate voters to bring this momentum to Congress when the time is right, which, we admit now is not exactly the time for this. So what are we doing if it's not the time right now? Well, we're really focused on educating people about the Electoral College so they understand about it, so that when the time is right and when the conversations begin to gain ground, they will have a background and understanding of what we're talking about. So what can we do now? As a local league, you can organize by choosing a league member to coordinate. Now, we don't actually we have to change the slide. The league does not actually have a task force. And this is, it's an honor, but it's a challenge of some of the presentations that have been requested from the League of Women Voters of the United States. They have turned around and asked our committee to do these presentations. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. Our committee started as a League of Women Voters Deerfield Lincolnshire committee, and we went to the state convention in 2017, and we did a little presentation, and we passed a will of convention motion at that convention, where it was the motion was that the League of Women Voters, the board members, when they went to the subsequent national convention in 2018, would support a motion to make the League's long-standing position to abolish the Electoral College a program item. In other words, take it from the back burner and put it on the front burner. So that's what we were trying to do at the national convention. So that was our motion at the state convention, was that Illinois would support it. And it was over, it was voted, and that you vote on a will of convention motion. And it was almost by acclamation. It was definitely supported. So at that convention, we recruited a few members from other leagues who said, well, I'm interested too. So our committee started meeting in 2017 with representatives from about, 6 or 7 different leagues who came up to Buffalo Grove, where I live, every month, every Friday at noon. We picked as our time. And that's when we prepared our first presentation, our first slideshow, and our first brochures, and started getting out the words. And then when we went to that 2018 convention, we did a caucus and we brought our motion. We were not successful in 2018, but we started recruiting members from other leagues. And then what happened was we went to Zoom because of the pandemic. And now at our last meeting, we had, and our last meeting wasn't even a speaker or anything. It was just a discussion meeting. We had attendees from 10 different leagues in Illinois and from 9 other states who attended our meeting. And so I guess LWVUS likes what we're doing because they have not formed their own task force yet, and they're kind of relying on us. So it's kind of a big responsibility, and I would like to see us, them develop something more official eventually. But for the meantime, I guess we're doing it. So if you would like to attend our monthly meetings, it's the third Friday of the month at noon. We're happy to have you. It's mostly league members. We have 1 or 2 friends that come occasionally. You could be the representative from your league, but it's not necessary. Most of our members are not officially representing their league. They're just league members who are interested. And so that's our committee. That's my pitch. I told Carol I'd fit it in at the right spot, and I guess that's the spot. And then you can start giving the presentation yourself. And it's scripted, and we're happy to help train you, give you practice. In fact, we're having a practice session in February for some new trainees, new presenters, and give the presentation wherever someone will have you. I've given this presentation at senior centers. I've given it to AAUW. I've given it to many leagues. So whatever group, to a couple of Rotary clubs, not the long one. I had to give a short one there. So that's our organizing part, to activate supporters. And of course, we're starting with the league members. And then the training, as I mentioned, we talked about the social group, and then the brochures. And so you've seen those brochures, and we're pretty happy with them. And so we have those available also for purchase from me or in a PDF form. And the next part we're still working on, this has not happened as yet. This is up to LWVUS. So we've asked them to create additional graphics for Facebook and for posters and stuff. And we were talking about Electoral College Day on January 6th, but the political landscape, I think, this year did not lend itself to doing that. So we did not. But I think it would be a fun thing in the future to have Electoral College Day, abolish the Electoral College Day, be on January 6th. And then eventually, when the league feels that the time has come to lobby the federal legislators to pass the resolution through the 2 houses, you would get an action alert from LWVUS. And then when that day comes, if it passes both houses by 2/3, then there's a whole new battle that starts then, which is in the states, and to get the states to pass the amendment. And so that would be the local legislators that you'd be contacting. So right now, the most important thing you can do is educate. Educate yourself, educate others. Our little committee will be offering training for league members and allies. So let us know. And the email you can use is pretty easy. And maybe Carol can put it in the chat. It's abolishing@gmail.com. And it just comes to us, it's on my desktop. Electoral@gmail.com. With or without training, you don't have to be trained. You could just read the script. You are encouraged to present this PowerPoint everywhere you can. Reach out to your local civic, and social groups, colleges, and universities. Anywhere there are people who are willing to listen and learn. And distribute our brochure wherever you can. Finally, momentum requires visibility. Let everyone know that the full power of the League of Women Voters is fueling the effort to abolish the Electoral College and elect our president and vice president by direct popular vote. So after 3 conventions at the 2022 convention, we were so pleased that the late Dr. Turner, the late beloved Dr. Turner, president of the League of Women Voters of the U.S., announced that the League of Women Voters of the United States was embarking on a nationwide, multi-year effort to abolish the Electoral College. And we were pretty overwhelmed by it and really delighted. So we hope that you will see action alerts around this in the future. And we're happy to have all of you listening to us today. And we hope that maybe some of you will become presenters in the future. And so that's my story.
Thank you so much, Rosemary.
Okay.
Let me just get a few little things here. All right, there we go. Thank you so much, Rosemary, for that presentation. Really quick in the chat, there was a question about if the Friday meetings are on Zoom.
Oh,
And
yes.
yes, they are. And how do they register for them? You send an email to Rosemary at that abolishing@gmail.com. And I'll be sending out a follow-up email to all of the attendees. It will have that email in it, a link to the slide deck, which is actually on the League of Women Voters US website, a link to the recording of today's meeting, and a link to the Abolish the Electoral College PDF brochure, which is also on the national website.
Right.
So we're going to open it up to questions. Our official time, I think, is 10 to 11:30. So we are on schedule, as we like to say.
Oh, I did those side trips, took a little extra time. I apologize.
It is a long presentation, but there's a lot that you need to work through because the Electoral College, it is a very complicated thing. So we're going to open it up to questions. People can put a question in the chat, or you can raise hands, but I'm not quite sure how to see everybody. We have,
You know what? The ones that raise their hand, they should be on the top of your screen. You see, they'll automatically come on the left. So if you hover over Zoom user, it should say ask to unmute.
Yeah. Although first I might ask the Zoom user, are you able to rename yourself first?
Yes.
Or
yes, so we know who you are. Yes.
You could rename yourself Zoom user, or put your question in the chat. And there is a question in the chat that says, the Senate still has the filibuster and Southern states will not want to give up that power. How do we overcome that obstacle? Any suggestions?
You know what? Here's all right. So here's my I have a fantasy dream, but also a more realistic daydream. So the possible one is that when people hear, what we want is to get people to understand what the Electoral College is, and eventually, no matter which state, we won't point out Southern or other states, no matter which state, eventually they'll see that the people want to change. But that may take a long time. And the league, if you go to that league website, they are relying on this compact idea, which I don't want to debate that, but we're focusing on an amendment. But what I foresee more likely is some unusual something would happen. So, for example, we have a third party candidate, this Robert Kennedy Jr., and I don't know if he's going to stay in or not. But at some election in the future, and I think something, it could be this election, 24, something unusual will happen. For example, it might become a contingent election, and then it goes into the House. And then the person maybe who uh, didn't get the popular vote is the winner. And I think people would be so surprised because they don't understand that. And they'll say, "What do you mean? How could that be? That can't be." And we'd say, "Well, you got to change it." And so something, it's not unpredictable that something unusual could happen. That Kerry Bush vote right there, where if it's the other party whose axe is gored, in that case, if Kerry had won the election based on electoral votes and Bush had lost, even though he had 3 million more votes, then it's the other party being affected. Then both parties would suddenly say, "Oh, gee, this can happen to both of us." So those things have happened already in the past, and they could happen in the future. And then we want to be ready and say, "We told you so." And I think that that could happen suddenly and quickly and unexpectedly. So that's why I think you're right. The filibuster is a big problem, but that may not be the problem. That may not be the issue. It might be something else. And even those senators that filibustered the bill when Birch Bayh tried to pass the amendment in 1970, they were joined by some northern New Yorkers who also were convinced that it wasn't going to be helpful to them. And there's a story that one of them came into Birch Bayh to try to explain why they were stabbing him in the back, and he just told them, "Just leave the office. I don't even want to talk to you." So, the politics is strange in this country. You're muted yourself there.
Yes, indeed. Politics are strange in this country. Our Zoom user did put their question in the chat, and they wanted to
Okay.
know if the recording can be put on our local league website. And yes, it can, and hopefully it will be. It might take a day or two though, as we figure all this stuff out. But yes. If there are any other questions, you can raise your hand. I don't see any. I see something in the chat here that I wanna just a comment that this was from Molly Shack, that this was an awesome presentation, Rosemary, and I loved your commentary as well. I feel heartened as well that if we educate people that each state is generally purple, but a little darker in blue or darker red, we can feel less separated, as well as diminish myth number 1. And she's going to sign up to join the cause. Well, thank you
Excellent.
very much, Molly. And I actually, in my notes, when we went through this presentation, I was trying to think, how do I tie this all together with our theme of bridging the divide, which is the theme for our issues programming this year. And that, yeah, I think if you go to a direct popular vote, you start to see, some of the numbers, like in the states that Rosemary mentioned, like Tennessee, that the number we're not we're not as red, we're not as blue as you see. And I personally have a lot of family members and colleagues in downstate Illinois, and they tend to not vote the same as me, and they feel very disenfranchised right now. And it's a legitimate feeling. And so this is always something that I use to bridge with them, that, this is one of the things that, the league does. And maybe you don't agree with other issues that the league has, but maybe on this one thing, you can join our cause in that as well.
As a league member, that's the most attractive part of this campaign, is that it will bring people together. It will make them feel empowered, that their vote counts, and they won't see certain states as enemies and other states, at least not on their presidential vote. Now, other topics maybe. I have one of my funny stories. I don't know how many of you grew up in the Chicagoland area, but I did, and the news station, one of them, you know, I was still in high school, so we're talking in the 60s. At the end of the newscast, that was when they had the fairness doctrine still in effect. They encouraged people to, they had 1 minute that they would give for someone to express an opinion on a topic. And then the following night, they would have a minute for the opposite point of view. So they, it went on for about 6 months or a year, before they gave it up. So one night, the it was the League of Women Voters, probably of Chicago or Illinois, and they said, you should vote absolutely in the next election. Everybody go out and vote. It's very important. And I clearly remember turning to my sister and saying, well, they're never going to find anybody on the opposite side for that. And then the next night, they found a guy who said he was an anarchist, and he said, "No, don't vote, don't support this government. It's the wrong thing to do." So that was pretty funny. So from those days, I remember that the League of Women Voters stood for encouraging people to vote, and the Electoral College system discourages voting. So yes.
Yes, that is a tenet of the league, is that we do want everybody to vote. And so I'm looking in the chat. I see another comment from Sandy that says, this is great. I have a better understanding of the reasons that this would be best for all. And then Vicky says, abolishing the Electoral College combined with ranked choice voting, we could bridge the divide. Yes, that is another. Does National have an official position on ranked choice voting yet? Or do they leave it
don't
up
have
to the local?
they have a position that allows flexibility in supporting different voting systems. So that was really written to enable leagues to support ranked choice voting without exactly saying it, because first of all, there are different styles of ranked choice voting, and then there might be other kinds of voting systems that people think up. So they didn't want to narrow it to one particular style. But one of the questions people bring up is, suppose you do have direct popular vote, how do you count them up at the end? Like you have your numbers. Suppose no one gets a majority. Are you going to require majority? Because no president really has had a majority of the popular votes. It's usually a plurality, like Clinton won with 43% of the popular vote. So maybe you want to have like whoever has the most beyond like a certain amount, like 40% or 42%. And then people say, well, what if it's too close? What if they don't all meet the margin? Are you going to have a revote? And I say, you know what? Ranked choice voting would fit right in there. That would really clarify how people felt better than having a runoff election. So I think that's it's interesting that many places are starting to experiment with ranked choice voting and getting people used to it. Because I could see it as a possible application once we had an amendment.
And DuPage County, with the new equipment that we got a few years ago now, they do have the ability to do ranked choice voting. So there's maybe in some municipalities we'll be adapting it. I've got Mary Jo has a question, so I'm going to ask Mary Jo to unmute. I think I've asked you. Hopefully I've asked you. Let me do it this way. Are you still there, Mary Jo? I don't know. I've clicked on her.
Let's see. When you click on her,
Unmute. I think I finally unmuted.
Hello, Mary Jo. Go ahead with your question.
Okay, I really don't have a question. I just want to say this is one of the best presentations of anything I've had in the past couple of years. I will say that our homeless, our housing presentation a couple of weeks ago was very good in Downers Grove, but that the thing that really hit me was definitely the Kerry situation. And I appreciate your giving such a wonderful talk on this issue. Thank you very much, Rosemary.
Oh, well, thank you. I did not write this. I threw in my own little add-ons there, but I did not write it. this was really our committee, and we included even some people from out of state were on the committee that put this final thing together, and they did it on Zoom. Joyce Williams, however, was the main mover and shaker of this one. And Karen Glendemeyer from Wilmette was the first person who wrote our first presentation, which was some of you may have seen. So it's really been it takes a village, and it's been a wonderful village. And I've given the presentation, of course, and I call the meetings, but if you throw a party and nobody comes, it's not much of a party. So we've been very fortunate to have so many interested, talented, devoted, interested people, and we're always looking for more.
Okay, so we have another question came in the chat, and it's from Ronald. And Ronald says, as I am the only male participating in this discussion, one left earlier, will this League of Women Voters move to abolish the Electoral College be seen as a female minority movement only? I would hope not. The part of an ongoing issue that the league does have is that our programming, and maybe it's because we have women in the title, does seem to predominantly just attract women to our programs. But our programs, public-facing programs, are available to everybody. We have very strong DEI policies in our leagues, so we would hope that this isn't seen as just a minority women's movement, because it isn't. It's important to everyone, and we thank you, Ronald, for coming. It's, and encourage other people that to attend our programs. And men can be members. We do have male members in our own Downers Grove League as well.
We have 3 male members in our Deerfield League, and it's a small league. We only have 40 some people. Yeah.
Right. Any other?
No, I will say the National League lately has been using some of that language, women powered this and that, and there's a group of us that don't like that because we're trying to get away from that. So, but they're not going to change it to the League of Voters anytime soon.
And actually, William, I get another one of our attendees today said 100 years to League of Human Voters.
That's right. There we go.
Yeah. And Mary Holbein says, point of information, Illinois State Assembly has appointed a task force to study ranked choice voting, and League of Women voter member Barb Lamons is on that. Yes, that's true. Thank you, Mary, for reminding us of that.
Mary, yes, yeah.
And Mary Jo
again.
Can I just add one more thing, and that is American Association of AAU University Women has the same issue with its title, and yes, we wish we had more men in our group too.
Right.
Okay. Any other? I had sort of a question. Every time I hear this presentation, I always learn new things. So I did not know that I always thought the president had to sign a constitutional amendment, but I guess if it passes by 2/3, they don't.
No, they don't. It's just through the House, the House and Senate, yeah.
Okay. Any other?
Well, because if it were something if it's a regular bill that goes by majority and he vetoes it, what do you need to overcome the vetoes? Isn't it 2/3?
Yes. Yeah.
So by having 2/3, yeah, his opinion wouldn't matter.
Or her opinion.
Or her.
Maybe someday. Maybe
Never
someday.
know. Never know. What can happen?
Any other questions?
Well, I want to say my thank you for having this program, Carol, and doing all the publicity to get such a nice sized audience, which I really appreciate, and distributing the brochures and the information to your members, which we also appreciate. And everyone, Carol has been a regular member of our committee, and we are training her to also give this presentation. So we look forward to having her, the next generation, because it's going to take some time to educate everybody. We're happy to have the next generation being trained to give to spread the word. So thank you, Carol Jean. I really enjoyed being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rosemary, for all of your help. And thank you to Marianne Honeycutt, who helped manage things with the waiting room and behind the scenes too. It takes a lot of effort with a different sort of skill set to do programs on Zoom. But I think when we do them on Zoom, we can reach a wider audience as well. So if I see no further questions, there was another comment that when state legislators pass amendments, governor's signature is not needed. So that as well. All right, well, seeing no other comments or hands raised, I will send out a follow-up email to the group. If you don't get it, you can reach out to me via our email roster or at events.civic.engagement at, I don't know what the end of our tagline is for, but if you go to our League of Women Voters website for Downers Grove, Woodridge, and Lisle, at the bottom of that website, there are a bunch of email links, and you can just email events and civic engagement and I'll get it, or even just straight to our league, and our communications person will get it and forward it to me. We want to make sure everybody gets the information that they want. And that everyone continues to participate, because through that, we end up with the best democracy that we can have. All right. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.